This edition of our podcast is brought to you by 360 Health and Well Balanced Nutrition.
Welcome to the Health Geeks Book Club podcast. Listen in as Kristen Norton and Eleanor Russell review all those great health and wellness books you've been wanting to read or you have read and want to talk about. Here's Kristen and Eleanor.
Hey, Eleanor, I've got a lot on my mind.
Well, what is it? I'm curious to know.
Well, we've been reading so much about habits and willpower and just the science of our brain, and I've got so many ideas I want to share.
You mean you just can't stop thinking about it? Your brain's still moving?
Yes.
Makes me think of a song.
Do you have some things on your mind too?
Yeah, well, I do, as a matter of fact. I always like to involve the audience a little bit, and I love it when people send me messages about how our podcast is affecting them. And I got so excited when one of my local colleagues said, I was listening to your podcast. I love the book on forest bathing. I went out and bought it. And so now I'm setting up a forest bathing area that people can, and I'm going to get my forest bathing guide certification, and we'll be opening in spring. So, here we've kind of flip somebody's trigger. They were ready, I'm sure, but we just helped maybe push them over the edge. And so our local area is going to have a place that people can experience forest bathing. And I can't wait to tell you all more about it as it develops and gets its feet under it.
That is so
Isn't
exciting.
That fun?
Yeah, I hear a lot about the forest bathing podcast that we did. That's a popular one for sure.
Yeah, I love it.
So something on my mind is that in the Willpower Instinct, Kelly McGonigal calls this the problem with progress. And it's really been bothering me because as a nutrition coach
and an American,
we're
driven to progress.
And I like to, build my clients up and remind them of the progress that they have made and the tiny habits, the atomic habits that they're working on, because we know that those compound and make a big change. But Kelly says that when people are reminded of their progress, that we can self-sabotage.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, this is mind-blowing.
Counterintuitive point, right?
It is. And so she specifically talks about dieters. And there is a small study where they reminded some dieters of their progress so far, and the other group didn't get a reminder about their progress. And the ones who were reminded chose a chocolate bar over an apple when they were offered a gift for their for what they've been able to do so far. And then those who weren't reminded of how much progress they made chose the apple. And she calls this goal liberation. And so her antidote is to think about your commitment to your goal and not the progress that you've made so far. So I'm kind of having this back and forth in my mind about
what you're going to do.
Yeah.
With your clients. Yeah.
Right. Because we've learned in James Clear book that atomic habits are important. Little changes add up. And it feels good to be reminded of our wins. But I guess we have to be aware when that can lead to self-sabotage.
Yeah, and it's that idea of who are you becoming rather than who are you right now.
That's a good point. We didn't talk about identity.
Yes.
And that was a big part.
And the outcomes, if they,
habits.
he has the Simon Sinek bullseye in Atomic Habits. I like targets too. So both Simon Sinek wrote a book, Start with Why, and then this Atomic Habit. James Clear talks about outcomes, and if you start the bullseye is, your identity, and then the outcomes come out of that. Versus if you flip that around and put the exercises, then that you'll become that if you go through all of that. He flips that around too. So who are we becoming? We need to be very clear of who that is. And then some of these other things will fall into place.
Right. And if we're not, then we're kind of setting up ourselves for failure.
Yeah, and that's that midline brain thing that the willpower lady, Kelly McGonigal, was saying, remembering why are you doing these things? And that's who are you becoming, really.
Yeah, so an example that really drove home for me was James' example of a smoker who, there's two smokers, and one is asked, do you want a cigarette? And one says, no, I'm trying to quit. And the other one is asked, do you want a cigarette? And says, I'm not a smoker anymore.
Yes.
And who do you think is more successful?
The one that's not a smoker.
The one that's not a smoker. And that's,
yeah.
So if you're trying to have healthy habits, you're a healthy person.
Yeah, and that actually goes back to the mindfulness practices. But Dr. Forrest Shackley wrote a book in 1951 called Thoughtsmanship of Well-Being, which was before this mindfulness craze. But he's not the first one to think of these things. He heard a lecture when he was studying biochemistry, or I don't know what. He was in the medical field and the theological field, but the lecturer said, what you think, you look, what you think, you do, and what you think, you are. And this stirred around in Dr. Shackley's mind, and he decided to explore that and write this book about it. But this is the same topic these guys are talking about, too. And even Kelly McGonigal says, you can't control your thoughts. The thoughts arrive. It's what you do with them. Like that idea, oh, I'm hungry. Where'd that come from? It just appeared in your brain. And a lot of us think the universe sends signals around too. So, thoughts can be put out from us that can affect people, and you can receive thoughts from other people. And so some people that talk about prayer believe that, prayer can affect other intercessory prayer and those sorts of things. So there's a lot to do with what we're thinking and how that influences our behaviors. And that, again, what we put in our brains, what kind of, we were talking about podcasting in one of our chit chats. People choosing to listen to good information or information that takes them from one place of understanding to another might be better than watching some murder mysteries ad nauseum, which the plot is very obvious, and you're just mind-numbing. So those kinds of ideas about thinking.
That reminds me, she's got a really powerful part towards the end of her book,
on willpower.
The Willpower Instinct, Kelly does, about accepting our thoughts, and tells a story about a practitioner helping people with social anxiety, and how instead of telling people to not think the thoughts that they have, like everybody's looking at me, or I'm so socially awkward, or they don't like what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's
I can relate to those. But so instead of ignoring those thoughts or pushing them away, this provider was telling them to just sit with the thoughts and accept the thoughts.
And watch the thoughts.
And then build on the belief that you are strong enough to handle those thoughts and feelings. And boy, is that so powerful. Yes. And I help people do that with their cravings and with the thoughts they have around food. And Kelly walks you through what we call the crave wave. I think she calls
surf the wave. Yeah,
surfing the wave. And she calls it like the urge.
Yeah.
How to surf the urge.
Yeah, surf the urge. That's it. Yeah.
But that can work with so many things, and that just reminded me of that when you said that we can't control our thoughts, but we can accept them, and we can sit with them and know that we're strong enough.
Yeah, and that idea that we don't have to purge the thought, and that's what I think mindfulness teaches us too, is you can't turn off the monkey chatter, really. You just have to say, oh, there goes that idea, and just so that way, I think the wave is a wonderful analogy. It's just, I feel it, but I'm going to let it roll out and recede, and it's okay. Mm-hmm. I don't have to engage it. I just have to watch it and be aware that it was there. How nice is that?
Right.
And it sounds woo-hoo-ish, but when you start doing that, things happen in your brain, and there is lots of evidence that stuff happens in your brain.
Right, and I don't remember the exact details, but with that anxiety practitioner, they were doing MRIs, and they noticed a big difference when they were able to not necessarily ignore the thought.
Another example I think that she put in there that I thought you were going to bring up, and maybe we have talked about, the little experiment with the people who they talk to them and say, it's okay if you miss the mark today when you go into this experiment, and if you eat some of that candy, it's going to be okay. You'll be all right. And the other people didn't get that permission to have self-compassion. Mm-hmm. And the group that didn't get that self-compassion prep talk had the worst outcome. So that idea of allowing yourself to be human and to have failure, but it's not going to define you or define the goal or the power that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's another thing that comes full circle for us, too, that self-compassion actually strengthens your willpower.
Yes, yeah.
Instead of saying, oh, I'm so bad, I can't believe I did that, that actually makes your willpower
and that self-compassion book really brought us to that self-criticism and self-compassion, but also the social context. And I think we've talked about a lot of times when we think other people are thinking things about us, they're not. And so that we put ideas on other people and then react to them inappropriately. Like, you think I look funny today, and you're probably thinking about what you're going to eat for, your kid's lunch. But I'm thinking you're thinking about me. And once you come to grips with, most people don't care anything about you, they care about themselves, you get along a lot better. And then that's why you need to take care of yourself. And that's why self-care is important.
Oh, yes.
And it's abandoned so easily
when
we think we have to take care of other people.
And I think I'm going to read this from the Willpower Instinct, but I think it kind of goes with everything that we've talked about so far. Mm-hmm. The limits of self-control present a paradox. We cannot control everything, and yet the only way to increase our self-control is to push our limits. And it's just this constant pull and push of, can I get 1% better? Can I improve today?
Yes, you can.
And if I mess up, it's okay. I can be kind to myself. And I also need to rest as much as I need to push.
Yeah.
Right? I need to meditate. I need to quiet the mind. I need to sleep. Mm-hmm. So it is this kind of balance or paradox between, pushing yourself and resting and being kind.
Right. And that exercise that we saw in the self-compassion book was repeated in the Willpower Instinct. I think they were talking about, we are so much more critical of ourselves than anyone else. And so that exercise where you put yourself in a chair and talk to yourself, you're much kinder. It's like, so you screwed up today, you'll be fine. That's what you would do to a friend. And so I love that even, it might be kind of fun to get all these authors in a room sometime and see what they say to each other. Because I think they would like parts of themselves.
Well, one last thing I thought was worth sharing is that if we want to strengthen our self-control, we may need to think about how we can best support our most exhausted version of ourselves.
Oh, I love this.
And not count on the ideal version of ourselves to save the day. So while we're trying to get our rest and our sleep and our meditation, our lives are also very busy. So set yourself up for that.
Yeah, you've heard the thing, do something for your future self today.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what that's addressing. And when I first ran into that was so liberating. It's like, that makes so much sense. Like, if I make up my bed this morning, which is a small 1% thing, right? It's not going to change the world. But when I come in the evening and my bed is made, it's like, oh, that looks so nice. Somebody fixed that for me. Oh, that was her. So she wants us to meet our future self and sit there and talk to our future self and say, and there were even exercises where people getting married did aged avatars and showed them to each other, which I thought was stunning. That is like such a good idea. You will love me when I am this person. That's what you're saying. You really mean it. And and when you kind of have a visual of that, it's like, yeah, I can do that. I'm in for this. I'm in for the long haul. Because some people get shocked when people change, and they didn't anticipate that on their wedding day. So knowing your future self, I think, and treating that future self with respect and compassion, it's kind of fun to think about.
Yeah, and when you visualize your future self, you can connect more with it because normally we don't really think of our future self as our real self.
Exactly.
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
But if we can connect to that and have self-compassion.
I want to take care of you.
Yeah,
I want to make sure you're happy 20 years from now, which is, again, what I do at 360health4u.com, making healthy happen and helping people look at healthy aging and thinking about taking care of that future self so they can be as happy as the one you know now.
And I talk a lot about helping your future self by doing some meal planning and meal prepping over at Well Balanced Nutrition. Check us out at wellbalancednutrition.com.
Having a backup plan?
And having a backup plan. All right. Well, thanks for listening in on our chit chat today.
Oh, we got some. You said you had a stack of books from your jaunt to the bookstore, so I can't wait to see what we select to read next.
Got a lot in store for you.
Okay.
Stay tuned.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Views and opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and are not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted, and no part can be reproduced without the expressed written consent of Kristen and Eleanor.